Hello, this is Organization with Olu, and today we're going to talk about the J curve. Stick around. I think you're going to like what I've got for you. Right now, what I'm going to do is share my screen. Okay, guys, we're going to go straight on to the J curve. Now, the assumption is hopefully you've done some groundwork on this. You've talked about depreciation. You understand the macroeconomic objectives on X minus M. We're going to talk about literally the balance of payments. And what we're trying to find out is what can increase exports? What can happen to increase exports? And exports is an important component of AD. Please go over that and make sure you know that. So let's go straight into it. Okay, let's go straight into the J curve. Right, first, I've got a question for you though. Retrieval exercise. Explain what is depreciation. So stop the video now and write down what you understand by depreciation. At the same time, also write down what you understand by the current account. So pause the video and do that. Okay. Hopefully you've got the answers, and the answer should be something similar to this. Depreciation means when a currency falls in relation to another. It's vitally important. It has to be compared to another currency. So when it falls in relation to another, okay. So that's really, really important that you add that. And in terms of what a current account is, a current account is an important part of the balance of payments, which shows the value of countries' imports and exports, as well as investment income and transfers between a country and the rest of the world. Okay, so hopefully you know that. If you don't know it, you need to go back over the basic information before you proceed to the J curve. Okay, so let's carry on with this now. Okay, what is the economic theory regarding the impact of the depreciation of a currency in relation to a country's exports? So if you look at the AD formula, you have X minus M. What's going to increase exports? One of the things that can increase exports is when your currency depreciates. So the theory suggests, economic theory is that when a currency depreciates, that can increase your exports. Okay, because it will lead to more exports being demanded. If you think about demand and supply, the cheaper your goods are, the more people will demand it. Obviously, there are some exceptions, but the theory indicates that, and it's very important to understand the theory. Okay, so once the exports are cheaper, people will tend to demand more, and therefore your exports will increase. Okay, this would ultimately lead to an improvement in the nation's current account. However, even with the depreciation, the current account may actually still get worse before it gets better. And this is called the J curve effect. And we're going to quickly talk about that. Okay, I'm going to do other feed videos, but this is just an introduction to what the J curve actually is. Let's look at this let's look at this family. Let's consider the case of the Robinson family, who are based in Texas in the US. They booked a holiday 3 months ago to visit Devon in the UK. The exchange rate, let me just get myself right out the way here. I keep doing it. Okay. The exchange rate at the time was $1.6 to £1. The holiday was priced at £1,000, which cost them $1,600. They decided only on 1 week due to the price. They would have loved to have had 2 weeks, but they found it a little bit expensive. Okay. A week ago, the pound collapsed, and now it depreciated from what, so now it's now £1 to $1. £1 is equal to $1. The Robinsons were disappointed, okay, because they would have happily paid £2,000 for 2 weeks. So can you see what we were talking about before? If there's a depreciation, your exports become cheaper, people will buy more. If this happened a short time ago, the Robinsons would have purchased 2 weeks holiday rather than 1 week. They only went for 1 week because if they found it expensive. But if the exports are cheaper, they would pay more and they would buy more of the product. So hopefully you're understanding why a depreciation should lead to people wanting more exports. Okay. So now what we're going to do now, we're going to go straight into the J curve. We're going to talk about the J curve very, very quickly here. Okay. And this explains why the current account may not immediately improve in the short term, even though there has been a currency depreciation. So sometimes it might not actually improve in the short term. And I'll explain the reason why. As you can go back to the Robinson family, what happened? What do you know? What did you notice that has happened in that point? What you should have noticed that they've already had a contract. So that's part of what the problem is sometimes in terms of the J curve. Okay, so the assumption here is that the elasticity of demand. I mean, we're going to talk about the Marshall-Lerner theory as well, but just for you to understand this, because I don't want to, and I think people tend to get confused because they link Marshall-Lerner with J-curve, which should be interlinked, and that confuses a lot of people. But I just want you to understand where the J-curve came from. So I will talk about Marshall-Lerner in another video. In this case, let's go to the scenario of there's a time lag. But before we talk about the time lag, we're going to talk about if you're in a contract, for example, you can't change that contract. Okay. So a lot of these, so when you say, oh, exports are now cheaper, or depreciation of a currency, exports are now cheaper, it's not always possible to change the contract and suddenly, oh, it's cheaper. England is cheaper. I'm going to buy a lot more. Because in the case of the Robinson family, they had already paid for the holiday. So they're already in contract. They can't ask for their money back. It's already done. And that's a problem in terms of the J curve. And that's one of the reasons why sometimes when there's a depreciation, it doesn't automatically lead to immediate improvement in the current account, simply because of things like contracts. You have existing contracts, there's contracts in place. Also, people may not even know that your currency has gone down. Okay. And that's part of the problem. And also, we talk about something in terms of imports in the short term are inelastic. Okay, I don't want to confuse you too much because we're going to go into this in a lot more detail. What inelastic means that if there is a increase in price, okay, or decrease in price in this case, it makes no difference to the demand. So we call it price elasticity of demand. Price elasticity of demand. The problem with this sometimes in the short run, it's inelastic. And the reason why it's inelastic is because of things like contracts and things like that. You can't easily change it in the short term. So inelastic simply means when there's a change in price, it doesn't change demand, especially in the short term. So let's draw this. Okay, let's draw this. Right, let's assume that the nation is suffering with a deficit, okay? And you need to go back, because we talked about a deficit, you should go back and know what a deficit is. It has a deficit in the current account. Now the nation's now experienced a depreciation. So hopefully it's going to improve the current account. So let's stay here. It's right here, okay? Yeah. And then suddenly there's a depreciation. Now you would expect it to start to improve, okay? But because of the time lag effect, because there's people have contracts, people don't know about it, it's inelastic, the demand is inelastic, it doesn't change. So and it actually gets worse because it doesn't change, it actually gets worse because you have less money to purchase more expensive imports. Because if there's a depreciation in your currency, your exports are cheaper, but imports are more expensive. So you're going to use a lot more money to pay for the imports, but people are not necessarily going to buy a lot more of your exports in the short term. So what tends to happen is that it start going down, and then it will go up like that. Okay, eventually it will go up, and that's what they mean by the J curve. It's kind of like shaped like a J. I know it's not so much of a J, but that's the way it is. It should be shaped pretty much like a J, okay? And that's why they call it a J curve, okay? Essentially, that's what it is. So it's gone from point A, it gets worse, it gets to point B before eventually, hopefully, it will get to point C. So hopefully you've understood this, and I'll do another video on the Marshall-Lerner and explain a little bit more. But that's where the J curve has come about. Okay. So if there's a depreciation, it doesn't automatically lead to an improvement in the current account. So hopefully you've understood this, and I'll do other videos to explain it in a lot more detail, including the Marshall-Lerner. Okay. Thank you very much. Bye bye.